Priestley. I'm Professor at the University of Stirling, and I've been there for about 23 years now, which seems like a long, long time. Previous to that, I lived in New Zealand, as I was saying earlier, and I'm originally from Sydney, near Sydney in Australia, although I don't sound like it. So, who's next?
I come from Cyprus, where maps are very political. It's a very big issue. I studied there for my first degree in the same university where I'm now working as an associate professor in curriculum and teaching. My master's was in Sydney, Australia, so yeah, intersections there, and the PhD in Cambridge in the UK. So there was a lot of zigzag around the world, shaping who we are in the process.
Mm. And Stavroula and I met in 2013, 10
in
years
Portugal.
ago now, in Portugal, when we were walking out of a dining hall,
Yes.
and got talking for a few minutes on the way to the next session of the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And we've worked together ever since.
Yes, and well, the book is one manifestation of that.
My name is Daniel Alvunger, and I come from Sweden, southeast part of Sweden, a small town by the Baltic Sea. I haven't been traveling around as much as you guys. I had a 6-month time in Birmingham, University of Birmingham, during my PhD education, but I stayed put in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm associate professor in education at Linnaeus University, which is also named after a famous person, Carl von Linnaeus. I don't know if you heard about him, but he was the one who systematized the words through giving names to plants and families. So like cannabis sativa, that is his doing, putting it into a family, so, for instance. Well, he sent out a lot of his disciples, so to speak, this was in the 18th century, so to the world to catalog and bring different flowers and so. Anyway, Linnaeus University, that's where I come from. I think we have not a 10-year history, but I think it's 9 years or something like that. I met you in
Linnaeus University.
Yes, at the conference, and then music and love just bloomed, and here's one of the results of that love. That collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I would like to say is actually this book is a testimony to the power of networking,
Yeah.
and working with colleagues. You know, and as early career researchers, it's the one thing I would encourage you to do. Find your niche, find your networks, develop your networks, and get working with other people. Academia can be a lonely place if you work on your own, but if you work with colleagues, it's a wonderfully fulfilling thing.
And if these colleagues are located around the world, then it makes it all more challenging and enriching at the same time, because you're outside, there's a push and pull from your comfort zone all the time, and also it puts you in a position of having to articulate things that you, in your own context, you have sort of take for granted or routinized or naturalized in a way, but then you have to place yourself out of that to be able to explain it and interpret it and make sense with it for people who are not familiar with that context. And yeah, it is curriculum making in Europe, even though we don't go in the attempt of even defining Europe, but the publishers sort of did it for us when they sent samples of the book cover as a map. And some of it's quite abstract. You see, it's like a map, but also, as you said earlier, like an arty, in fact, like an art inspired. And in one of the first versions, Cyprus was missing, which I encountered all the time, mainly because the assumption is that, Turkey is outside and the Middle East is not European, and countries like Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, it's highly questionable. Are they geographically European? Are they culturally, politically, in terms of religion? And Europe does not coincide with the European Union, nor with the Council of Europe. But Belarus is not in the Council of Europe, but is in the continent. So it's Yes, it changes as we go along. We have different definitions now than during the Cold War, for example.
I think that probably the cover's not too bad because it sort of almost extends to the Caucasus, doesn't it? So,
Yeah.
which is perhaps the natural geographical boundary of Europe. It includes Iceland as well, is that part of Europe?
Which is often missing in other maps.
Which we don't have a chapter on, of course. But it was rather strange that this bit with the authors on, with the editors, was here. So it covered Turkey and Cyprus. And we looked at it and said, well, we've got a chapter on Cyprus, that really isn't right. So we ended up with this particular representation, which we like. Actually, it's nice and vibrant.
And another point with this is, I mean, all the national borders are not in the same color. I mean, so not saying that it represents this, but it also tells a story about that you could find phenomena in different parts of Europe that are similar in other countries. I mean, like the red color would practically be part of Sweden and something similar in another. Anyway, not to make too much of it, but that's also an idea with this and these different, the national borders.
Yeah, so it's blurring the boundaries.
Blurring the boundaries.
Yeah, and looking for patterns by other means rather than legal jurisdictions or political frontiers.
So it's probably worth saying a bit about where the book came from. We had a number of projects on the go, and a number of us, including some colleagues in Finland, including Tina Sonia, who's not here today, came together in Cyprus for a conference. It was the Comparative Education
Society in Europe.
Yeah. So we came together for a conference and we took the opportunity to have a couple of days just to bang around a few ideas. And the results of that were, I think, the special edition, or was that before then?
That was before, but it was in the process of being written.
So the book was one project that we launched. The other one was a large-scale funding bid, which was unsuccessful, but we went the miles on that and pulled it together. But the book itself, again, drew heavily on the networks that we have. So we're very aware that there are omissions in here. There's nothing from Germany, for example, very little from Eastern Europe, and the Nordic nations and perhaps the UK are overrepresented in it. So we're very aware that this is an edited collection that gives a flavour of some of the patterns and trends that are happening across Europe in terms of curriculum making. And curriculum making, we really sort of construe quite broadly. There's a chapter in the book that seeks to define it, and I'll talk a little bit about that, or we can talk a little bit about that shortly. But what we're trying to do is really encompass what happens as curriculum is made across broad domains of activity, from discourse, international discourse, particularly policy making in particular states and jurisdictions, in schools and colleges and other educational spaces, etc.
It was tough finding the title. In a sense, we couldn't say European curriculum making because it was countries depending on where the contributors were coming from, and that is instantiated in how, as Mark was saying, it's not all countries or like a systematic collection of specific countries, but where we were coming from, who we knew and we were connected with, which is, in a way, goes back to the community we were talking about, finding or creating networks when they're not there. Like, I think what we're trying to do today is, towards that direction. Even when there's diversity, diverse contexts, perhaps we could also say that there's a diversity in approaches and theoretical conceptual tools mobilized by different authors in the chapters. It's not about uniformity, but it's about bringing people together and discussing similar issues, not despite, but because they're looking at it from different perspectives.
I think we were trying to do probably two things with the book. One is to produce a systematic, not exactly a theory, but perhaps a way of viewing, a heuristic for viewing curriculum making as a set of activities, and that's what the first chapter and the final chapter are about. But also to draw upon empirical work that had been done across a number of countries to explore how this heuristic might be used, how it illustrates and services different approaches, diverse approaches to curriculum making, which are very context dependent. mean, we live in a globalised world, but we also live in a world where local traditions are extremely important. Always struck by the term globalisation, which has been used a lot in the literature, as this sort of hybrid of the international, the global on the one hand, and the strong local traditions. And it's, having done some recent work for UNESCO on curriculum as well, it's very evident that even when you have a homogenisation of curriculum policy, they still reflect these very strong local traditions, even if it's down to the way in which terms are understood differently through local lenses.